This is Josh Beiser from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any suggestions for games you'd like me to look at here on the channel, please let me know. Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Dissecting Design. The first one I did was on a game that I thought turned out pretty well, and that was the evolution of Diablo 3. But as part of the design of this playlist and the series, I also want to look at games that unfortunately didn't quite make the cut in one reason or the other. And for today's Dissecting Design, we're going to be unfortunately exploring what the heck happened with Clockwork Empires. For those of you who missed it, Clockwork Empires was the second game from developer Gaslamp Games, who made the successful Dungeons of Dreadmore. And following that, they wanted to expand to something quite different, which was a combination of a steampunk Lovecraftian city builder. And the original developer blog for it really painted a fascinating picture, which sadly over the course of years and many alpha and beta builds did not manage to reach. And I hate to talk about the game like this, because this was one of my most anticipated games for some time. But from what it sounds like, this game may have actually caused Gaslamp to go under, because there has been any updates and people who were a part of it aren't talking about the studio anymore. And unfortunately, while it may be a little too soon to be, digging up the grave in a manner of speaking, it's still important to talk about these kinds of elements, especially for designers to avoid similar traps. So, let's get into the game and we can start talking a little bit more about what the gameplay is. Alright, now that we're in game, we can at least show a little bit of what Clockwork Empires was about. This is one of my very far along settlements. The developers were hoping to combine several genres, specifically the city builder and the dwarf fortress, esque genre. You have your colonists that come in three different classes: low, medium, or overseers, and the upper class. You can see they have different emotional states, and this is controlled by what they see, do, and all that stuff. And the majority of the work in the game is done in workshops. And we can zoom in here and see how things are going. And the idea of the game was to balance building your colony with, of course, ever greater threats and dangers. And I believe Gaslamp was built a custom engine to run the game, and they were also planning on doing multiplayer. But there were a lot of unfortunate issues that came about during development. So I'm going to pause the game here so I can collect my thoughts on this. And the first one, and that has really, chased or dogged the development from the start, was just exactly what Clockwork Empires was supposed to be. Was this supposed to be a city builder with interconnected buildings and resources? Was it supposed to be a colonist or a people simulator like Dwarf Fortress, or even something along the lines of RimWorld, where you can get into all kinds of craziness due to whatever your people came up with? And throughout the development of the game, Gaslamp kept on experimenting with the designs, and they were even planning on having multiplayer. That was one of the original announcements, and that got a lot of people excited, as there weren't too many games of this kind that dealt with multiplayer design. But what ended up happening, and what we saw over the many alphas and then the beta period, was that the game just kind of never really grew in terms of its design and its foundation. Instead, it kind of felt that for every step forward, the game went back 2 additional steps. In my talk on Prison Architect, I mentioned how Introversion really developed, or really used this kind of layered design to build the game up system by system, making sure that each foundation was solidified before moving on. What we saw with Clockwork Empires, however, was Gaslamp kept going back over systems. For instance, farming and kind of growing food saw multiple balances and changing the UI. how you would actually use your workshops also was altered. Before, you could set up different queues depending on basically a queue for the overall workshop. So if I had one item producer or one module like that, I could set up 4 or 5 different queues for it. If I had 4 or 5 like in this, I could do the same thing. And all the while, they were building this engine up and trying to also experiment with 3D at the time, which 3D is another thing that we really don't see in these kinds of city builders. And as we can probably tell, one of the main reasons why, of course, it is a lot more work. It's more intensive on the engine, it's more challenging for the art, and it kind of also added to the challenges of developing the game. And over the course of the early access, it never really seemed like there was momentous or major progress made. And this is a really big counterpoint to titles like Prison Architect and Stonehearth, and even something like Subnautica and other early access titles. You can tell when a title has a really solid game plan for when the core gameplay loop really comes into its own early in the development. I'm talking like 5 or 10 alphas in, that kind of thing. And Prison Architect, around like alpha, I think 10 or 15, you really could see this game taking shape. While of course all the systems weren't in yet, the core elements, the UI, the basic gameplay loop, and what the player was expected to do was solidified. And then the rest of it was simply adding more systems and growing things along. With what they were doing with Clockwork Empires, a lot of these systems kept getting redone and gone over. One of the big ones, like I mentioned earlier, was farming, but there's also the UI over here. And I mean, this system right here never really got changed at all over the course of its entire early access. And one of the things that I noticed very early in terms of its alphas was that the game kind of just like sprawled out in terms of what was in. As I said with a game like Prison Architect and Stonehearth, features weren't in the game that weren't meant to be either grown or stuck in terms of its design. With Clockwork, from very early, they were already doing stuff with lower, middle, and upper class housing. There was military, there were research units or research modules as well, but a lot of the stuff wasn't implemented. And as a really big example of this, the upper class characters literally don't do anything in the game right now. I mean that. There is no function attached to them to be in your colony. One of the early systems was having a prestige system, which you can't see up here anymore because it's not in there. This was eventually replaced with a diplomacy, which we can see right here. But one of the parts of the early game was you would build up essentially favor points with your with the main city or the main Clockwork Empire, and you could then trade them in for specific bonuses when you saw fit. And having the aristocrats or the upper class, the point was they would provide you with more points so you could do more stuff. It was kind of supposed to be like the mid to late game transition. You would use them to get you more bonuses to help you grow faster and start getting the higher expensive stuff. But when the renown or bonus points, whatever, I forget the name of the system, was removed, the aristocrats just stayed, but nothing else was done with them. And this is kind of the issue that we have with Clockwork Empires, that as they were developing the game, they were trying to do everything at once. And the problem is, you can't do everything at once in a game like this. Because of the interconnection of these systems, if one thing breaks, it will affect other systems. If you're, for instance, there was a time where there was a problem with farming. Things weren't being balanced in terms of how much food was being produced by your farms. And if your food isn't coming out right, that means that it's very hard to test how things are being cooked in your kitchen. And if there's problem with food being cooked in your kitchen, it means it's hard to measure how happy your colonists are if they're all starving. And this kind of escalation or this downward spiral was a major part of the early periods of Clockwork Empires. Now, hardcore players enjoyed it for the challenge, the people who were used to stuff like Dwarf Fortress and other titles along those lines. But this makes it very hard to play test and balance when all these systems are essentially in flux. And this became a major point of the game with trying to learn it. And over the course of early access, it just never seemed like this core gameplay was taking shape. And to make things worse, even more than that, it didn't seem like Gaslamp kept to a solid game plan, and I hate to say that about them. But over the course of the early access, as I said, we saw systems being done and then redone. We saw elements that were kind of just left around, and this is just a far cry from a game like Prison Architect or Stonehearth. I'll give you an example. We have modules. Let me see if I can pull this up. Like, you have stuff in your various bunkhouses or your homes, but they serve no purpose. And they didn't serve a purpose for almost the majority of the early access. What Gaslamp eventually did was institute kind of a bonus system or amenities. If you perform certain actions, you would get bonuses in terms of having more people being able to stay in those buildings. And while this sounds like a good idea, the problem is it was only limited to those specific buildings, which were the lower and middle class. We never, again, got to the upper class buildings. Like, here is an aristocratic manor right here, and look at this. There are no amenities. If in the other games, like Stonehearth or Prison Architect, if this system was going to be implemented, it would have been implemented to everything that was affecting it, because that's what their focus was for each month. But with Clockwork Empires, things just kind of got added in and then changed without any real solid foundation. And there's even more to that. Like, we have stuff over here. Like, there's probably other items in the game that you can pick up that really don't serve a purpose. Like, such as these stacks of dormant spores. A major part of the game was the Lovecraftian themes, and how you had to balance building your colony with keeping people sane, or making use of eldritch tools at the cost of sanity. And that whole element never made it in. And as we look around the map here, I want to talk more about some of the advanced systems that were put in, and how we almost got like a cart before the horse scenario. One of the big issues that kind of kept itself around throughout Clockwork Empire's early access was the mid to late game transition. Once you've already established your colony, once people are living, now what? And this is an area that Gaslamp, I think, really struggled with. And I don't know if it was because they just kept coming up with ideas and changing them, or they just simply couldn't figure out an easy solution to this. And one of the major patterns of the early access, especially when we got to like alphas like 30 plus and then into the betas around, I think, update like 45 or 50, was trying to give the player purpose or give the colony something to do. And we saw the integration of some systems, including one very controversial one, which we'll talk about in a minute. One of the late game changes, besides having the diplomacy, was this idea of supplying buildings. So your laboratory, your barracks, mines, and we'll come back to mines in a minute as well, your foreign office, and a few others required supplies in order to be used. So here we have paper bundles, military requires ammo, and so on. And the purpose of this was to provide essentially a use for all the resources or advanced products you're putting out. If we come over here, For instance, I can smelt iron to create the ore that I need, and then that ore can be used to produce more advanced items, higher quality modules, which can do more work. But the issue that they were running into was how to do this without making the game seem like a slog. And this is one of the big failures, I'm afraid, of Clockwork Empires. Instead of things becoming more refined and easier to play, the game became just more and more cumbersome as you got further in. For instance, we have this resource called Bric-a-Brac, which was added, I think, somewhere like in the middle of the alpha period. And Bric-a-Brac was essentially a catch-all resource used to produce cosmetic items. And the cosmetic items' purposes were to essentially beautify buildings. Higher the building quality makes people happier, and if they're happy, they'll work longer, as you can see, or they'll work more shifts in that said building. But the problem is that these items serve no real value. The colonists will not use them, they don't provide any bonus for having them, and it just seemed like an excuse to use your resources. And that kind of became a trend in the later parts of the alphas. As I said earlier, you basically set up building-wide orders for whatever you want constructed. So it didn't matter if I had one workbench or 15. What they changed was, in order to have multiple orders and make use of stuff like job orders like this, you had to, by default, build multiple workbenches. And you would assign basically a job to each bench and different priorities to them. This is not the same as we see in other city builders, or even games like Stonehearth, where I set a priority, and they'll go through it. I only need to build 4 or 5 different resource constructors or modules. They'll just do it all themselves. As another big point, in terms of adding more and more grind and repetition to the game, previously you could basically build items as they're needed. Like for stuff that requires multiple resources, you can set it up to start constructing while the resources were coming in. So if, let's say, I want to build, let me pull this over here, I'm trying to find a good example, like this. Like, let's say I wanted to build something ornate. I could set the order, and they would start to gather those resources, and this was also applied to building structures. And then they would bring them over as the resources come in. What they changed was characters would not start any orders unless those resources were already constructed or gathered. This slowed the proceedings down and made it so you had to keep an eye out on more things rather than making the game easier to play. Even when you get advanced modules like I have over here, these advanced ovens essentially build multiple copies of a resource instead of one. And while this all helps out, you're still tied to this same system. And it just makes things frustrating to play, because it just feels like I'm not really getting better, or my economy isn't getting better, it's just getting harder and harder to keep track of things. And speaking of keeping track, that takes me to one of the more controversial options that was actually rescinded during Clockwork's early access. During the early access period of Clockwork Empires, Gaslamp made numerous development posts, and their dev blogs are fascinating to read. And one of the things that they were running into, as we were just talking about, was trying to make the resources matter. Give the player a reason to have to make this stuff, and to essentially create almost like a progression wall or a progression curve to play. They didn't want you to just build everything immediately and then be bored. And their original idea was essentially a maintenance tax. And what this was was for every building that you construct in your game, it had to be maintained weekly using materials. Essentially, it's a catch-all for like gears, wrenches, stuff like that. And your various construction places, like your carpenter, your ceramics workshop, stuff like that, could build these resources. Now, of course, you won't see it here because it was removed. And what happened was if you didn't have those resources, your buildings would shut down until you got them in. And this was hated by just about everyone because it added in essentially a penalty for building your structures. Because the more items you put or the more modules would raise the amount of stuff you need to maintain. And all this did was add more of a grind. Now, not only do I have to keep a constant supply of resources for adding new stuff, but now I actually have to keep building these materials, and then if I don't, I will be punished. And the system of allowing buildings to be restocked, as we were talking about a few minutes ago, was the solution or the next step after that. But this kind of thought process really just undermined Clockwork Empires' development, sadly. Again, for every step they took forward, they would go back over another system in a later patch or a later build. And that's not good progress. For these kinds of games, especially, not just for game development, but for multi-system games or multiple mechanics like this, you need to be making solid progress and essentially putting your foot down and say, this is done, we need to move on to something else. Because if you don't do that, then you're basically just spinning your wheels in the mud. And it hurts the game overall, because you can't do anything new if your old systems have to be kept getting redesigned. And then you can't see how things are working because you're changing things at the same time. Another major change that people didn't like was this kind of interface down here. Instead of letting you basically drag and select everything you want in terms of farms, chopping trees, mining, etc., which you used to do just by being able to basically go like this. Do a mouse drag, select it, and you're done. They changed it to force you to use these features. And Gaslamp's rationale was to make it easier for new players. But the problem was, once again, this was them going back over old systems that no one was really asking for. And what's even funny was that despite that, they never really changed, like making this easier. You still can't sort overseers. It's still very hard to see who's doing what. And they never went over systems like this, like the job assignment, which would show you all the jobs that are currently working. You can move them up and down by priority. And this screen right here, I don't think was touched at all throughout the early access period. And which is kind of surprising because it's probably one of the more complicated things to look at. Now, if we come over here, now they did like spruce this up a little bit, this kind of UI, which I thought was a pretty good idea. But again, it never seemed like there was a solid game plan. It never got to the point of everything essentially clicking for Clockwork Empires. Like, if you look right over here, this mini-map doesn't even show you what you're looking at right now. And if this was any other game, this would probably have been done very early, and then again, that would have been the end of it. But instead, they just kept working on multiple things, and nothing ever seemed to get solidified. Another major part of the game, like I said earlier, was the Lovecraftian themes. And instead of having choices, this all got added into this kind of event-driven system. If we look over here, let's see if I can find the event. It only goes so far. You have these events that come up. If I can go over here. Well, this actually isn't an event, it's just an alert. But they let you like choose like options from various choices, and they were supposed to affect how your colony would grow. But unfortunately, it never got beyond more of just a short to mid-term change. The most advanced ones were the ones that people were being driven nuts, and they would form cults. But again, the cults never really did anything of note, and if you keep your eye on your colony enough, they're very easy to manage. You basically have to screw up on purpose in some sense in order for them to show up. And like stuff like the colonists, for instance. Like this goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of never really having a solid game plan as to what they wanted. The system for your colony is very weird by the fact that you technically only manage one of your three groups, which are the overseers. And there's of course still some bugs in the game as well. So here's a bit of a choice. You can either let people like examine things or use science, and that's pretty good. But again, it never really goes more than like 1 or 2 steps. So I'll let them do that and we'll see what happens. And as I was saying, with the colonists, what happens is that your overseers basically are the ones who do a task, and then the lower class essentially are extensions of said overseer. And here's another big point of things that didn't really get done. Your overseers have different personality traits and abilities, as you can see over here. Now with these skills, as they become better at it, they do a better job of that. But one of the things that was supposed to happen was your colonists were supposed to grow. They would get special perks, special traits, as you can see over here. And this would affect what they would do, essentially, or the jobs they would be more suited for. And this system just never really got better. Like, once a character shows up, they're kind of stuck like that for the rest of the game. And even then, the trait system never really mattered, because the game never got more advanced along those lines. Like, here's an example. I can't just click on this to clear the terrain. I have to come over here and do this. And that is a weird secondary step. And even then, it doesn't look like it's actually working. Oh wait, there it goes, I think. But this kind of, like, I guess, dissonance with what they were trying to achieve just kind of seeped its way into all aspects of the game. And we never really got that clicking. Now, with that said, to add at least a little bit of positivity to the game, the next thing I want to talk about are some of the things that kind of did work or were improved upon over the course of early access. As we got later into the early access for Clockwork Empires, we started to see new systems added. And these systems not only seemed a little bit more well thought out, but they came in being a little bit more, I guess, integrated in the game compared to the older systems which were still being worked on. Research, for instance, tied into your laboratories to allow you to upgrade your colony with additional features, new modules added, and even get you more stuff as things go on. And also has kind of a Masters of Orion feel by the fact that you'll get random upgrades which you'll have to decide between or to regenerate and get a different pool. Another part that I really liked is the mining system. Mines are kind of the mid-game push towards getting more stuff. And how it worked, well, looks like there's an attack. And of course, speaking while this attack is going on, another big issue with the game is that you really can't control your military. So we can sort of try and make out them fighting. Oh, someone just died. And of course, if you lose an overseer, you lose all the colonists who are attached to them until you get someone else replaced. Hopefully it wasn't my military guy who just passed. No, thankfully. Oh, it was a mine. Yeah, that's alright. But coming back over here to the mine system, once the game decides to be kind and stop saving on us, I may just turn off the autosave as well, because it doesn't really serve a point anymore. But, there we go. So the mine system, one second, I'm actually going to just turn off, if I can't even turn, oh, there we go. We'll turn off autosaves for the rest of this. The mining system was later on, and what this did was allow you to set up near these nodes on the map to get bonus resources based on where you build these mining tunnels. As you used a mining shaft or use a building, you'll be able to dig deeper and deeper and get more stuff out of the mine. And it would basically play out the lore of when you get to the end of it, the Stygian depths or the Stygian abyss, you have no idea what's going to be there. And that would have been very cool. That could be where we add in those Lovecraftian elements or items that can really mess or alter your colony. But again, once we got that initial part of it, that was kind of it. There was no more work done with it. The science, the same thing. The idea of using the various factions for favors, I like this idea, but of course it came later on. Here's like another event that popped up. Stuff like that. They also updated the UI here, making it easier to understand how many overseers you have, how many workplaces you can afford, and that was pretty good. You can see over here, oh, it just shows how many more workplaces, disturbance, how much food I have. So things were improved on in some aspects, but again, the game just never came about, never found its own place. And that kind of takes me, I think, to either the final part or close to the final part of this breakdown of Clockwork Empires. As we come to nearing the end of this dissection of Clockwork Empires, I want to talk about kind of when the ball dropped on the game. In about, I think it was like late September or somewhere September or October of 2016, the last update in terms of its beta was the one that kind of added in the system for using supplies in your various workshops, as you saw over here, and things were starting to look improved. By this point, Gaslamp announced that multiplayer was going to be cut from the game, which this happened about, like, I think 10 or 15 builds ago, or updates ago. And things were starting to be improved. And then they announced that the game was going into 1.0 the following month. And this was a sign that there was some big trouble. The game was simply not ready for prime time. Considering some of the bugs that was going on, again, missing features, you have elements here that still don't serve a purpose, or their purpose is just so limited. And many people thought that this was kind of Gaslamp either giving up on the game, or they could have just ran out of the funding that they had for it. And there were still missing issues in terms of the mid to late game. In fact, there is still no late game at the moment. The only real reason to keep playing Clockwork is to see how many colonists you'll have, but there's nothing that goes beyond it. Besides these modules and these structure that you get, there's nothing new that's unlocked. You even have stuff inside. Let me come over here. Let's see, where was it? You have all kinds of advanced structures and advanced modules that you can build, but it's never really like a motivation for you to get them other than to say that you have them. Same goes for over here with the kitchen. which at some point maybe I can find it. There we go. Again, these all they are just making things a little bit better. Oh, let's see. Alright, so apparently there is some work with Colts going on. But again, there's just nothing here that's keeping me from playing. And I want to show off one more system. Oh, you can see people are sort of stamping their feet around about what could be done to maybe improve or change things. But again, with a lot of the missing elements, a lot of the missing themes to the game, when it hit one point, it was just cut down by negative reviews. In fact, another feature that was worked on that wasn't added was roads. Having road functionality to your various buildings, advanced lighting. There was talks of being able to connect buildings via electricity or power, similar to what we saw in something like Factorio. But again, all these ideas just never solidified into a single design. Like I said with earlier examples, and Factorio being another one, with a game like Factorio, the developers got their core gameplay loop down very early into its development. And you can play the game from almost any of its alphas and see, okay, this is what this game's about, and I can see what they're going for. And I mean, even right now, the game is still being worked on, it's still in early access, and a lot of their content is simply expanding on systems and adding new toys. And of course, they're going to eventually do a polishing up of the UI. However, there is, in terms of its core gameplay, everything that's in there is pretty much done. Yes, they'll add in new stuff to play around with, but they're not going to completely rebuild their game. And it kind of felt like with Clockwork Empires, they just kept redoing these systems. And I know I've said that a few minutes ago, but it just needs to be repeated here. And Stonehearth is a similar beast in terms of what Factorio did. Stonehearth took quite a bit to get going. They spent the majority of their time after their Kickstarter getting their engine working and getting that as finished as they could. And that was a very smart move on their part, because once their engine was done, they knew exactly what they were able to do with it, and they could design these systems accordingly. With Clockwork, they were still making engine updates and changes to it over its early access. At one point, they changed how all the items and characters in the world would be, I guess, categorized by tags. You can see a few tags down there underneath Aspen. And while this was a great idea, this was something that should have been done like Alpha 2 or 3, not Alpha, I think it was like late 40s, early 50s when it happened. And that's the issue there. There was just, never felt like there was a solid game plan. And with a game like this, the whole point of city builders and stuff like Dwarf Fortress is that kind of greater than the sum of its parts. All these systems working together to essentially create something bigger. You see this in stuff like Big Pharma, City Skylines, SimCity, etc. That what I do in one part affects the other areas and vice versa. In a game like the old school city builders, like the Impressions era, I build resources, which then get sent to my marketplace, which then gets sent to my people to make them better, which lets me get more money, which lets them evolve so I can produce better stuff, and the cycle just repeats. Here, it feels like things are just like shot out into the ether. Like, my people don't use almost anything that I build. I can't construct things to, let's say, advanced farming gear, or advanced brewing, or stuff like that. There is stuff in the research, but it's not that same thing that I'm constructing something in my carpenter shop, or I'm sorry, this is my metalworks, which will then have a major impact on my colony. Come over here to the workshop. Like, there's stuff that I'm building here, like even like stuff like the standing desk, spice rack. The bookshelf literally doesn't do anything. I mean that. I don't think it really does anything unless, I think, does the laboratory use that? No, they use these buildings, or use these things. But it never felt like things were progressing and my colony was building up, which would give me more stuff to do. Instead, it just became more and more of a grind. I mean, right now I have 70, well, 69 because someone that got killed, colonists here, and I don't see any reason to keep going. Again, we have all these spores here, which could be doing something, but they don't. And when there is no connectivity between your systems and your design, it just doesn't work. And with that, let's move on to our final part. I want to talk about, I guess, some lessons of what to take away from it, and what they could have done maybe a little bit differently. Back to the main menu, I guess, for my final thoughts, and one final point of what they could have done. Like I said, one of the issues with Clockwork Empires was trying to motivate you to play. And what they were doing, what they started to do was this idea of having the world be locked, and then things would become open based on your progression. And they originally just had, or they were first doing it with just a population. Higher your population pool, more areas open up. And while this was an okay idea, I think they should have went the other way around. Have each location essentially have a goal. And if you complete that goal, something new gets unlocked, similar to the Buying of Isaac. Like let's say for instance, like this biome here, that the goal is produce 50 gold ingots, or yeah, that's right, 50 gold ingots. If that works, I unlock X. And then we could have colonies that are essentially free play mode, that you can basically have all this crazy stuff that you unlock happening at the same time. And that would have been at least some form of persistence, some reason to grow and build your colony. But the problem is that because of how disconnected these systems are, one biome is really the same as the next. Yes, I am going to be producing different things in my farm, and the tiles are going to be different, but that's not changing how I'm playing. The beginning of the game, in terms of what we'll be doing for the first 20-30 minutes, is going to pretty much be the same throughout. Get a farm going, build basic homes, get more overseers. None of that will be altered. I'm not going to find something that's going to change my game around. If I don't build that stuff, my people are dead, so I need to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And again, it just never seemed like this came together. And I guess let's move on, or let's wrap things up for this video. So to sum up what happened, Clockwork Empires was definitely, I hate to say this, an example of over-designing. They just kept redoing systems, kept changing their game plan, that nothing ever became solidified until it was too late. The fact that they waited so long to eventually cut multiplayer, and while the fact they were still building ideas around it while the rest of the game was still not even done, was not a good sign. Stonehearth, they said, will eventually, hopefully, have multiplayer, so who knows, this next part may not be relevant in the future, but they're at least saving that kind of stuff until their game systems are done. And as we talked about, when you're building a game like this with so many interconnected elements and systems to it, you really need to take a methodical approach to it. Because you need to have a consistent amount of progress, or your game will never get done. You can't just work on 5 or 10 different things at the same time, and especially if they're all supposed to be connected and at the same time be their own system, it's just not going to work. And as we saw over Clockwork Empires Alpha and then in Beta, it just never came to be what they were originally talking about. And we talked about this earlier. I know I've mentioned this multiple times on Game Wisdom and on the channel, but you need to get your core gameplay loop or your foundation determined and solidified as quickly as you can. Because if you change that, it will change everything. And Clockwork Empire simply never got that gameplay loop down. And you can see the evidence in that with, again, redoing these systems. Farming was changed multiple times, and the things that could have used some improvements, such as the overseer interaction and content like the upper class, just never got done. And if they did approach things from a system by system point of view, it probably would have taken them about as long as this did, but it would have afforded them a much more clearer path forward. If they would have just said, okay, for this month, let's just, like, if the early build just had, let's put buildings down, that's it. Let's make sure that works. Let's make sure our engine can do all that. We're good. Okay, that's done. Now, let's focus on what's the next step. Farming. Let's get our farming system completely done. Let's get it as balanced as we want it. Okay, that's solidified. Good. Let's move on to the next. And repeat and repeat. And again, if something doesn't work, you can easily trace it back to the newest system or what you're currently working on. But because they didn't do that, it just never got to that point where we can say, okay, this is what Clockwork Empires is. And I think with that, we will wrap up this week's episode of Dissecting Design. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments, be sure to let me know below. If you were a longtime fan of Clockwork Empires like myself, what's your take on what happened over this whole early access state? And like I said, let me know. As always, be sure to like and subscribe and all that. And otherwise, be sure to check back daily for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And look for Dissecting Design episodes usually once a week. And if there are any games you would like me to take a look at, let me know. As evident with, unfortunately, talking about Clockwork Empires, good and sadly bad games are up for dissection. But until next time, have a great night, and I'll see you all then. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBicer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBicer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.